Still standing, still breathing, still here. Do you have any idea what that means? Do you understand the sheer, unreasonable, terrifying weight of the fact that you are still in this room, still in this life, still in one piece, after everything that was launched at you, aimed at you, detonated beneath your feet while you were just trying to walk forward? Most people don't survive what you survived. Not metaphorically, literally. We're not talking about hardship, we're not talking about rough patches or difficult seasons or the kind of pain that builds character and gets mentioned in a graduation speech. We are talking about the kind of damage that rewires a nervous system, the kind of loss that removes a person's ability to trust the ground beneath their own feet, the kind of psychological violence that leaves no bruises, only silence, and a version of you that has to relearn what it means to exist safely in the world. And you absorbed it. You absorbed all of it. You didn't dissolve. You didn't disappear. You didn't hand your sanity over to the chaos that was handed to you. You stood inside the fire, not because you weren't burning, not because you felt nothing, but because something inside you refused to surrender the last piece of yourself that they hadn't yet touched. And that right there, that is not human. That is something else entirely. Before we go further, this channel has been demonetized, which means every second of this content reaches you without a safety net. If this has ever hit different, if something here has ever landed in a place nothing else could reach, there is a link in the description. A super thanks. A few moments of your time in exchange for content that takes everything to produce. It is not required. It is never required. But if you want to keep this alive, that is how. Now, back to you. So before anything else, before the analysis, before the truth of what just happened to you finally gets spoken out loud, I need you to sit with this for exactly 1 moment. You are one of the rarest things on this planet. Not because life was kind to you, because it wasn't. And you're still here anyway. That's the only introduction this conversation needs. Now, let's talk about what you actually survived, and why the people who watched it happen cannot sleep tonight. There's a category of pain that no one has a clean word for. It's not grief, because grief has rituals. It's not trauma, because trauma implies a single rupture. It's not failure, because failure implies you did something wrong. What was done to you was sustained, calculated, repetitive. It was a campaign, not an incident. It was designed to make you the author of your own destruction, so that no one else had to sign their name to what they built. They came at you from the angles you trusted most. Not strangers, not enemies you could see wearing their hostility openly. It was the faces you had fed, the people you had defended when they weren't in the room, the ones who held information about you the way collectors hold art, privately, possessively, waiting for the moment its value could be spent. That's the specific devastation they delivered, not just the wound from the hands you had opened your chest to let in. And the thing about that kind of damage is that it doesn't just hurt the surface, it convinces you. It convinces you that your perception is faulty, that your sense of danger is miscalibrated, that maybe you imagined the coldness, the shift, the slow withdrawal of warmth that no one would acknowledge was happening. They made you doubt the evidence of your own lived experience. And that is the most precise form of psychological destruction a person can inflict on another. It doesn't just break you, it makes you break yourself. But here is what they did not account for. Here is the detail they missed in all their careful architecture of your undoing. You kept records. Not on paper, not in journals, in your body, in the way your stomach clenched at certain names, in the way your jaw set when certain conversations began, in the way something in your chest quietly refused to accept the narrative they were, writing over the truth you already knew. Your body was smarter than their strategy, and eventually, you listened to it. Every single thing they launched at you, you processed. You didn't perform processing for an audience. You didn't announce your healing on a timeline. You sat with the weight of it in rooms no one else entered, and you did the most ferocious thing a person can do in the aftermath of being dismantled. You chose not to become the damage. You chose not to let the cruelty that was poured into you become the thing you poured back into the world. That choice, quiet and unseen as it was, is the most violent act of resistance you could have committed against everything they wanted you to become. Let's be specific, because this isn't a general conversation about resilience. This is about them, the ones who positioned themselves close enough to monitor the damage, the ones who expressed concern in tones that contained just enough warmth to disguise the curiosity underneath, the ones who asked how you were doing not because they wanted you to be well, but because they needed to know how close you were to the edge. They were taking measurements. They were waiting for the number that would tell them you were finally done. You know who I'm describing. You've known since before this sentence was finished. There's a face, or 3 or 7, that arrived in your mind the moment I said the ones who watched, because you already did the math. You already processed the timing of when their interest spiked and when it cooled, and what exactly was happening in your life during both. You already noticed that their energy increased when you were struggling and dimmed when you stabilized. You filed that data. You just hadn't yet been given permission to trust what you filed. I'm giving you that permission now. What you observed was real. The strategic nearness during your most vulnerable seasons was not coincidence, not compassion, and not care. It was intelligence gathering. It was the behavior of people who needed your failure to validate something in themselves that they couldn't confront directly. Your destruction was supposed to be the proof they needed. Proof that you weren't what they suspected you were. Proof that you were, in the end, as breakable as they needed you to be, so they could remain comfortable in the smallness they had chosen. Because that is the thing about people who invest in someone else's collapse. It is never really about you. You are the mirror. You are the external verdict on choices they made long before you entered the room. If you fall, if you crumble, if you dissolve into the chaos they quietly engineered around you, then they get to believe that the path they took was the only possible path, that the compromises they made were necessary, that the things they surrendered about themselves were not surrenders at all, but wisdom. Your failure was supposed to be their absolution, and you refused to provide it. You refused, not loudly, not with a speech or a confrontation or a public declaration. You refused by simply not breaking on schedule. You refused by continuing to breathe on days when breathing required a decision. You refused by remaining inconveniently and infuriatingly yourself, even after everything that was deployed to make you into something lesser. Your continued existence as an intact human being is the single most devastating thing you could have done to every person who needed you to collapse. And you did it without even knowing it was a war. Let's not romanticize this. Let's not soften the inventory. What you went through belongs in the category of experiences that statistically, demonstrably, measurably break people. Not weaken, break. We have data on this. We have decades of research on what sustained psychological pressure, social betrayal, identity attacks, and isolation do to the human nervous system. The research is not optimistic. The research says most people do not come through the other side of what you walked through without significant permanent damage to their ability to trust, to connect, to believe in their own worth. And yet here you are, structurally intact, not unmarked, not unaffected, not pretending it was nothing, but intact in the ways that matter, intact in your capacity to feel, intact in your sense of what is real and what was fabricated about you, intact in the part of you that knows the difference between who you actually are and who they needed you to be for their own psychological convenience. That preservation of self under sustained assault is not a common outcome. It is a statistically improbable result. It means something specific about the kind of person you are. Most people, when they are subjected to what you were subjected to, respond in one of 3 ways. They internalize the narrative completely and become the diminished version the attackers were building. They externalize the damage and become the thing that was done to them, repeating the pattern in new directions. Or they numb. They armor. They build walls that eventually become prisons, and they live inside the safety of their own shutdown, protected but unreachable, even to themselves. You did none of these things completely. You lean toward healing, in the dark, without a roadmap, without witnesses, without applause. That is the 1% outcome. That is the result that doesn't happen by accident, doesn't happen by luck, and doesn't happen by being soft. It happens when something inside a person is built from a material that cannot be converted into the product pain is trying to manufacture. You have that material. You've always had it. The entire campaign launched against you was, at its core, a test of that material. And every single attempt failed, not because you fought back, because you were simply made of something they didn't have the tools to reshape. Think about the specific moments when the damage reached its peak. Think about the nights when the weight was so precise it felt engineered, because it was. Think about the conversations that were designed to leave you smaller than you arrived. Think about the spaces you walked into and felt the temperature change because your presence reminded people of a verdict they were hoping wouldn't come. You moved through all of that with your name still attached to your spine. Most legends don't survive that. Most legendary people, who history would have called great, buckled under lighter loads than the one that was placed on you. Let that truth settle somewhere deep. Here is where they made their most fatal error. When you went quiet, they celebrated. When you stopped defending yourself in rooms you were no longer present in, they read it as defeat. When you withdrew your energy from the arguments they kept trying to restart, they announced victory to anyone who would listen. They told the version of your story that required your absence to survive. And they told it with confidence because you weren't there to contradict it. They mistook your silence for surrender. They will spend years recovering from that mistake because your silence was not surrender. Your silence was selection. You were selecting what deserved your energy and discovering, with increasing clarity, that they did not make the list. You were selecting your future over your past. You were selecting your sanity over the satisfaction of winning arguments with people who had already decided what they believed before the argument began. You were selecting yourself, quietly, without announcement, without a declaration that anyone could screenshot or spin. You simply chose yourself and left them in the narrative they needed to maintain. And here is what silence does to people who are watching you. Here is the thing they didn't understand about choosing not to fight. When you go quiet, when you stop reacting, when you remove yourself from the loop of provocation and response that they had built their entire strategy around, you force them to confront something they were using your reactions to avoid. They have to sit with themselves. They have to be in a room with their own interior, without the distraction of managing your response to what they've done. And for people who are running from themselves, that is not a mercy. That is a punishment more precise than anything you could have designed deliberately. Your silence echoed in them. Your calm became their chaos. Your refusal to perform the breakdown they had choreographed became an accusation they couldn't unhear. Because the only response to someone who absorbs your worst and continues walking forward without becoming their worst is shame. Not loud shame, the quiet, inescapable 3 a.m. variety that arrives when no performance is available to drown it out. They lie in that silence now, the silence you chose, the silence they occupied when they thought they were watching you fall. It came back to them, and it came back furnished with everything they actually are. So understand this with precision. Every time you chose not to respond to a provocation designed to expose you, you were not losing, you were documenting. Every time you absorbed the misdirection and the false narrative and continued building your life with your hands, instead of dismantling theirs with your mouth, you were not being weak. You were being strategic in the most advanced sense of the word. The strategy of the person who understands that their healing is more powerful than any victory they could claim in the middle of a war that was never about justice to begin with. They came in with shovels. They were thorough. They were patient. They went back years, combed through versions of you from before you knew what you were building, looked for the contradiction, the collapse, the moment you weren't who you claimed to be. They shared their findings in whispers that they called truth. They compared notes across tables you had once sat at. They built a case with the dedication of people whose entire sense of safety depended on finding you guilty. And after all of that, committed meticulous, quiet excavation, this is what they found. Nothing that wasn't already yours to own. No secret that destroyed you. No contradiction that unraveled the person you had always been. No evidence that you were the thing they needed you to be, so that their own behavior could be classified as reasonable. They found a person who had made human mistakes, absorbed human pain, carried human confusion, and still, underneath all of it, maintained a coherence of character that made everything they were trying to build around you collapse under the weight of its own dishonesty. They found the truth, and the truth was the most inconvenient thing they could have possibly uncovered. You are clean in the way that costs something. Not clean because you were never tempted. Not clean because your hands never shook. Not clean because the damage didn't reach the places where your worst impulses live. Clean because you made choices, in private without recognition, that preserved the thing inside you that no amount of external pressure could corrupt. That is a harder cleanliness than innocence. Innocence is the absence of exposure. What you have is something forged, something that went into the heat and came out with its essential nature unchanged. That is a different category of person entirely, and they know it. That's the part that keeps them up at night, not their guilt alone, their knowledge, their specific, undeniable, privately held knowledge that they directed the full force of everything they had at you, and you remained you. That knowledge is corrosive. It doesn't allow them the comfort of having been misunderstood, or having acted in good faith, or having simply been wrong. They know exactly what they did, and exactly what it was supposed to produce. And they have to live in the gap between what they built and what you became. That gap is not forgiveness. It is not punishment. It is simply the truth, and it is inescapable. So let them keep the report of their findings. Let them live with the document they spent years compiling. Let it remind them, every time they return to it looking for the ammunition they were promised, that the investigation concluded not with your exposure, but with theirs. The microscope, when they finally looked into it clearly, was pointing in both directions. And what was revealed on their side of the glass is something they will be reckoning with long after you have moved so far forward that the memory of their scrutiny doesn't even register as a feature of your landscape anymore.